Make sure to like and subscribe if you agree that some people are underestimated until the moment they finally show the world who they really are. And as we start, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Here's how it all began. They said the hangar was quiet that morning, but the truth was stranger than that, because before anyone even touched the controls, the Mi-17 seemed to hum with a kind of restless memory, as if waiting for the one person bold enough to wake it. And that's where our story begins, with a dusty maintenance logbook discovered in the wrong office, filled with half-written notes about a mysterious, unauthorized startup years ago. The handwriting shaky, but the signature unmistakable, a general. Whoever wrote it never finished the report, and the last line ended mid-sentence. It happened because she wasn't afraid to try. Then nothing, just a pen dragged across the page. What no one knew that day was that the story behind that unfinished line belonged to Ava Miller, 27 years old, American, underestimated from the moment she stepped onto that Joint Forces base. She wasn't supposed to be anywhere near the cockpit of a Russian-built Mi-17. She was just a pilot trainee, still fresh, still learning, still treated like she needed hand-holding when all she wanted was a chance. It was the kind of base where old jokes passed as leadership. Call the new one kid. Tell them they don't know anything yet. Remind them how many years and strikes they still have to earn. And that morning, hot, bright, humming with distant engines and the metallic smell of jet fuel, her captain leaned against a fuel drum, arms crossed, and tossed out a line he thought would make the crew laugh. "Hey, Miller," he called, loud enough to carry across the tarmac. "Why don't you start up to Mi-17 for us?" The mechanic snickered. A couple of pilots raised their eyebrows. Someone muttered, "She'll panic." Another said, "She won't even know where the battery switch is." But Ava didn't panic. She didn't laugh. She didn't flinch. What they didn't know, what nobody on that flight line had any clue about, was that Ava had been obsessed with rotary aircraft since she was 14. Not American birds, not the glossy ones she saw at air shows, but these old, complicated, temperamental Russian machines she had no business loving. She collected manuals like people collect postcards. She watched grainy declassified videos instead of movies. She memorized diagrams until she could close her eyes and see every switch placement, every valve, every checklist step in perfect sequence. And the Mi-17, this hulking, weathered machine abandoned under a film of dust, was the one she knew best. So when her captain meant it as a joke, meant it as a reminder that she didn't belong, she didn't answer him. She just stepped forward. Something changed in the air around them, the laughter faltering a little as she walked toward the open side door of the helicopter. She climbed in like she'd done it 100 times, though she'd only ever been inside during a tour 2 days earlier. Her hands didn't hesitate, not because she was reckless, but because she was certain. And that certainty was something no one there expected to see in the new girl. The cockpit smelled of dust and metal and old leather. Sunlight sliced across the cracked panels in long gold lines. She took her seat, strapped in, and for just a moment, she allowed herself to feel the weight of it. This was the same model she'd dreamed about for more than a decade. Outside, the crew's amusement began to shift into uneasy curiosity. Her captain stepped forward, brows tightening. "Hey, Miller, don't play around in there," he shouted. But she was already moving, methodical and quiet. "Battery on. Inverters on. Fuel pump pressurizing." The overhead switches responded with satisfying, heavy clicks. The sound carried out of the open door, and by now the laughter had stopped completely. Someone whispered, "No way. She knows what she's doing." Someone else, "She can't possibly, but she could." She reached for the starter panel. Her fingers hovered for half a second, not out of fear, but from respect. This wasn't a toy. This wasn't a joke. This was something she had waited her whole life to touch. Then she pressed the starter. At first, nothing. Just the faint whine of the system building pressure, like a slow breath filling metal lungs. Then the engine coughed, choked, caught, and the sound rolled across the hangar like distant thunder waking up. Heads snapped toward the helicopter. Dust began to tremble on the ground. The massive rotor blades groaned, shifted, twitched, then started their slow, hypnotic rotation. Mechanics dropped their tools. The fueling team backed away. A lieutenant cursed loud enough for everyone to hear. Her captain looked like someone had punched the air out of him. And Ava, sitting alone in the cockpit, illuminated by the rising instrument lights, held her breath as the vibration deepened, as the old machine came fully alive, as if recognizing a familiar touch after years of silence. She wasn't supposed to do this. She wasn't cleared. She wasn't qualified. But she was ready. And outside, as the blades gained speed and the wind from the rotor wash whipped across the tarmac, something else happened, something none of them saw coming. A black staff car screeched around the corner, tires shrieking, heading straight for the flight line. The door flew open. A figure stepped out. A general. The same general who would one day sign the unfinished report that landed in the wrong office. And the moment he heard those blades thundering, he did not look amused. He looked furious. And that, right there, was the moment the entire base realized the captain's joke was about to become the start of something none of them were prepared for. The instant the general stepped out of the black staff car, the entire atmosphere on the flight line changed. Not gradually, not subtly, but violently, like someone had ripped the comm out of the air and replaced it with raw electricity that made every person within sight of the Mi-17 stand a little straighter and breathe a little quieter. The helicopter's rotor wash still pushed dust in unpredictable spirals, the blades thundering overhead as they wound down. But even that enormous mechanical roar seemed to shrink under the weight of the general's presence. Pilots who had been laughing a few minutes earlier were now frozen mid-gesture, hands awkwardly half-raised, as if unsure whether to salute or sprint in the opposite direction. Mechanics backed away from the aircraft with the slow, cautious steps of people retreating from a crime scene. And Ava's captain, the man whose joke had set all of this in motion, looked like he was witnessing the collapse of his entire career in real time, his skin almost translucent, his mouth opening and closing like he was silently rehearsing a defense he already knew wouldn't save him. Ava could feel all of it from the cockpit, the tension, the dread, the disbelief twisting through the crowd like a gust of cold wind. She powered the system down with the same calm precision she had used to start it, flicking each switch in the correct sequence, letting the old machine settle into its cooling hum. Her heart hammered, but her hands didn't shake. They didn't dare shake. She knew enough to understand she had done something both extraordinary and unforgivable, something that would either define her future or destroy it. When she finally unstrapped and climbed down, the noise of the helicopter seemed to dim around her, as if the blades themselves were watching. The moment her boots hit the tarmac, the crowd parted wordlessly, not out of respect, but out of sheer confusion. This trainee, this quiet young woman everyone had underestimated, was suddenly the center of a storm no one could predict. The general's eyes locked onto her with the precision of a targeting system, sharp, unwavering, and carrying the weight of decades in uniform. Up close, he was even more imposing, tall, silver-haired, his decorations gleaming against his pressed uniform, his expression carved from stone. But when he spoke, he didn't address her first. He turned, slowly, deliberately, toward her captain. Explain. Just one word, but it sliced through the thick air like a blade. The captain stuttered, tripping over his own voice as he tried to justify what had happened. He rambled about morale, about a harmless joke, about how he didn't actually think she would touch the controls, let alone start the helicopter. His excuses tangled together, collapsing under their own weakness, and the general's expression never softened, never even flickered. It wasn't just anger, there was disappointment there, too, a deeper, sharper kind. When the captain finally ran out of half-sentences, the general looked past him, straight at Ava. And just like that, everything narrowed, the crowd blurred, the helicopter noise faded, and Ava stood alone in the center of an invisible spotlight she never asked for. Lieutenant Miller, the general said, though she wasn't technically a lieutenant yet, but no one dared correct him. Tell me exactly what you did in that cockpit. His voice didn't accuse. It commanded. That made it more terrifying. Ava swallowed, feeling the grit of dust on her tongue, but she forced her shoulders back. If she was going to be chewed out, she would at least be honest. So she began to speak. She explained the electrical system checks, the fuel pressure readings, the cross-start sequence, the rotor engagement, the torque stabilization, all the steps she had memorized over years of obsessive study. Every word she spoke seemed to pull the general deeper into scrutiny, his eyes narrowing not in anger, but in calculation. Behind him, members of the crew exchanged glances, some shifting. Uneasily, others watching with stunned fascination. By the time Ava finished describing the final steps she executed, even the wind seemed to fall still for a moment. The general looked over her shoulder at the Mi-17, its blades still slowing, each rotation sending a rhythmic tremor through the ground. Then he said it, quietly, but loud enough for everyone to hear. That startup was clean. For a few seconds, no one moved. No one breathed. The sentence hit the flight line with the force of an explosion without sound. Clean. Not lucky, not accidental, not reckless. Clean. The captain stared at the general as if hoping he misheard. Mechanics blinked at one another. One pilot muttered under his breath, "You've got to be kidding." Ava felt her chest tighten, not with fear this time, but with something unfamiliar, validation, sharp and overwhelming. The general turned back to her, studying her with new eyes, as if replaying the last 10 minutes through a different lens. "Who taught you to do that?" he asked. Ava hesitated only for a moment before answering. "No one, sir. I studied it myself." The general repeated the words, tasting them. "On your own." There was no disbelief in his tone, only a kind of slow, dawning respect that made even the captain flinch. The general exhaled long and deliberately, glancing at the captain with a look Ava couldn't fully decipher. Anger, perhaps, but also disappointment and leadership that failed to recognize potential. "You should have known what you had in your ranks," he said to him, and the captain's face collapsed inward, as if the reprimand was a physical blow. Then the general turned, gesturing for Ava to follow. "Walk with me." She didn't look back as she stepped forward, not at the helicopter, not at the captain, not at the stunned onlookers whispering behind their hands. The sun beat down on the tarmac, the scent of fuel still lingering in the heat as she walked beside the general. For the first time since the rotors began to spin, Ava allowed herself to breathe fully, deeply. Behind her, the Mi-17's blades made their final slow turns, the massive machine settling into silence as if acknowledging that it had chosen its pilot long before anyone else realized it. And somewhere in the back of her mind, Ava understood. A joke meant to embarrass her had just rewritten her future in ways no one on that base, not even her, had been ready for. The general walked with Ava in a silence that felt heavier than the engine noise still echoing across the tarmac, a silence that didn't scold or accuse, but measured her, assessed her, as though every step they took revealed another piece of the person he had just discovered behind the cockpit glass. The sun beat mercilessly on the concrete, turning the air into a shimmering haze, but Ava barely felt it. Her mind spun with the same restless energy that had always filled her whenever she sat in a simulator or flipped through the pages of an old manual. But now it was amplified, sharpened by the weight of what she had just done. When they finally reached the far edge of the hangar, the general stopped, turning to face her with the full authority of his years, his stripes, and the countless decisions he had made on flight lines just like this one. "Miller," he began, his voice measured. "You understand that what you did today could have ended your career before it began." Ava nodded, ready to take it, whatever it was. "Yes, sir." But he didn't continue with reprimands. Instead, he studied her, really studied her, as though trying to reconcile the quiet trainee he'd barely noticed before with the woman who had just performed a flawless Mi-17 startup like she was born inside the airframe. "Tell me something," he said after a moment. "Why? Why'd you do it?" She inhaled, the hot, fuel-scented air filling her lungs as she searched for the truth. "Because I knew I could," she said finally. "Because I've studied that aircraft since I was 14. Because it deserved to fly again, not sit in a hangar gathering dust. And because," she hesitated, afraid the last part would sound arrogant or foolish. "Because no one ever lets me try." The general's expression didn't soften, but something in his eyes did. A flicker of understanding. The look of a man who recognized ambition when he saw it, especially ambition that had been forced to wait in silence. "You were ready," he said, not as a question, but as a statement, as a verdict. "Yes, sir," she replied. "Long before today." The general took a slow breath, folding his hands behind his back. "Then hear this clearly," he said. "I do not reward recklessness. I do not reward disobedience. But I do reward excellence." Ava felt her heartbeat stutter, then quicken. He continued, the words sharp but carrying a weight that made her stand even straighter. You demonstrated technical mastery over a foreign rotary aircraft at a level some of my rated pilots struggle with. Your procedure was clean, deliberate, and, frankly, impossible for someone with your limited formal hours. He stepped closer, his voice lowering, as if sharing something meant only for her. Effective immediately, I'm assigning you to Mi-17 systems training. Full access. You'll be under direct supervision, but you'll be learning that aircraft properly. The world around her seemed to shift, sound dropping away, heat fading, the entire base shrinking until only his words remained. She opened her mouth, but the only thing that came out was a breath, shaky and disbelieving. The general raised a hand before she could speak. And understand this isn't because of what happened today, he said. It's because of everything you did before today. The studying, the discipline, the focus. You earned this long before you touched that cockpit. Today only revealed it. Ava swallowed hard, nodding, barely managing the words. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet, he replied. Because this means responsibility. It means expectations. And it means eyes on you. Eyes that are going to look for every mistake you make, just waiting to say you don't belong. He paused. You'll prove them wrong. If you're as good as you showed me, you will. And with that, he turned back toward the flight line. Ava followed, still absorbing the magnitude of what had just happened. As they walked, the crowd that had gathered earlier shifted. Uneasily, unsure how to react now that the narrative had flipped entirely. The laughter from before seemed like it had happened years ago. Mechanics stood at attention. Pilots straightened. Conversations cut off mid-sentence. When the general approached the captain, the man looked like he was bracing for public execution. The general didn't shout. He didn't humiliate. He simply spoke with the calm precision of a man who expected competence and would tolerate nothing less. Captain, you will oversee her training. You will do it properly, and you will not underestimate your personnel again. Is that understood? The captain swallowed so hard Ava could hear it over the wind. Yes, sir. Good, the general said, because she is no longer the trainee you think she is. With that, he dismissed him with a nod and stepped away, leaving Avi standing in the center of the stunned, watching crowd. But this time, the silence wasn't suffocating. It was shifting, reshaping itself into something else entirely. The looks aimed at her weren't mocking laughter or dismissive smirks. They were curious, respectful, some even admiring. Ava walked slowly back toward the Mi-17, drawn to it the way she always had been, even before she ever touched its controls. The aircraft sat quiet now, its blades fully still, the sun gleaming off the worn metal skin like a second heartbeat had faded from it. She reached out, her fingertips brushing the cool surface, and for a moment she stood there, letting the truth settle. Not the shock, not the fear, but the realization. She belonged here. Truly, definitively, undeniably. It didn't matter that she was young. It didn't matter that she came from a place far from here. It didn't matter that she was a trainee who wasn't supposed to touch anything. Her preparation had carried her. Her knowledge had spoken. And the aircraft, this old, temperamental, magnificent Mi-17, had answered. Word of what she'd done traveled across the base like wildfire. Some doubted. Some exaggerated. Some whispered that she must have been lucky. But none of them could erase what the general himself had said. Her startup was clean. That night, long after the sun set and the base lights cast long shadows across the darkened tarmac, Ava walked past the Mi-17 one more time. The air was cooler now, the moon glinting off the helicopter's frame. She rested a hand against it, feeling the faint warmth still lingering from the day. We'll fly someday, she whispered, not as a promise, but as a certainty. And as she walked away into the night, she knew in her bones that her career hadn't just begun. It had launched.